The studio buzzed with tension as The Late Show got underway. Stephen Colbert walked confidently onto the set, his smile precise and practiced, waving to the audience before taking his seat. Cheers erupted as Elon Musk appeared, his tall frame moving deliberately under the spotlight. His gaze swept the studio, scanning it like a strategist sizing up the terrain. The lights intensified the pressure, setting the stage for what would become an unexpectedly confrontational evening. Few expected Stephen to remove Elon from the stage, but the early signs of friction were already visible. Stephen opened with a light jab, teasing Elon about his flair for disruptive ideas. But it wasn't long before the conversation pivoted to the evening's true focus, Elon's latest climate initiative. The tech mogul had introduced a proposal to deploy solar-powered drones to release reflective particles into the atmosphere, a bold geoengineering effort aimed at rapidly cooling the planet. The world was split on the move. Stephen raised a skeptical eyebrow as he challenged it head-on. Was this innovative problem-solving, or another example of unchecked ambition? Was Elon trying to rescue the planet, or recklessly gambling with it? Elon remained composed at first, outlining the scientific rationale behind the idea, data-driven and time-sensitive. His tone was clear and matter-of-fact, but it carried a subtle strain as Stephen's skepticism intensified. The host pressed harder, painting unsettling pictures of overcast skies and ecosystems destabilized by an artificial fix few truly grasped. Why, he asked, did Elon believe he had the authority to intervene on such a scale? And who would carry the burden if it went wrong? The audience stirred, some applauding Stephen's pushback, others backing Elon's urgency. As the discussion deepened, Stephen shifted to the ethical stakes. He accused Elon of sidestepping global consensus, suggesting the plan ignored democratic input in favor of personal conviction. His gestures grew more animated, his voice more insistent. Had the planet consented to this, or had Elon decided that intellect alone was enough? The crowd fed off the clash, alternating between support and unease. Elon's calm started to fade, his fingers restless on the armrest as he responded with stark realities, melting ice sheets, rising seas, and looming disasters that hesitation wouldn't solve. But Stephen wasn't looking for a solution. He was seeking confrontation. By the end of the segment, the lines were drawn. Stephen had cast Elon as a lone innovator, meddling with nature's balance, while Elon's clipped responses revealed growing frustration. The applause leaned Stephen's way, his jabs landing cleanly, but Elon's silence was heavy, his expression cutting through the host's confidence. As the show cut to a break, tension lingered in the air. How much more would Elon endure before pushing back? And when that moment came, what would it look like, and who would take the hit? The tension was unmistakable. As The Late Show came back from its break, studio lights flared, and the audience settled into a low buzz of anticipation. Stephen Colbert leaned back behind his desk, riding the wave of his earlier remarks. His slight grin suggested he felt firmly in control. Across from him, Elon Musk sat upright, his jaw tight, revealing the pressure just under the surface. The topic of geoengineering still hung heavily in the room, unresolved and electrified. What had earlier felt like playful debate now hinted at something more serious. Stephen jumped right back in, tossing out a sarcastic remark about Elon's drones turning the sky into a billionaire's art project. He leaned in, eyes sharp, and challenged Elon on the broader impact. Farmers caught off guard by climate shifts, communities facing the fallout of an untested solution. His tone was sharp, suggesting Elon was too removed from the consequences of his own ideas. The audience responded with laughter and applause, fueling Stephen as he painted a bleak vision of a world shaped by Elon's ambitions. Elon responded slowly this time, his voice steady but pointed, pushing back against the showmanship. He spoke plainly about the millions already suffering from climate disasters, people facing floods, fires, and heat waves, while critics focused on showy takedowns instead of solutions. His remarks briefly quieted the room, but Stephen kept the energy high, steering the conversation toward a personal critique. He questioned whether Elon's drive for large-scale fixes came from a desire to be seen as a hero, a messiah complex wrapped in solar panels. The line hit its mark, and the crowd roared, pushing Stephen to keep going. Emboldened, Stephen began pacing, gesturing broadly as his tone climbed. He demanded Elon name a single community he had spoken to, one local voice included in the planning process. The challenge hung in the air, direct and cutting. Elon's expression tightened, his fingers curled slightly. He began to explain, referencing a network of researchers and technical experts. But before he could finish, Stephen interrupted, turning to the audience with a dramatic spin, brushing the answer aside as elitist jargon. The dismissal hit hard, and Elon's expression turned cold, his patience clearly thinning. The exchange reached its peak. Stephen, now fully in command, returned to the question of responsibility. Who would be accountable if the plan failed? Who would step up when unintended consequences appeared? Each word was delivered like a blow, and the audience responded in kind, echoing his confidence. But as the host continued, Elon's silence grew more noticeable. His eyes locked onto Stephen, unmoving, as though studying him carefully. Lost in the rhythm of the moment, Stephen didn't notice the shift. The room, already tense, now felt charged with the possibility of confrontation. Elon's restraint was visibly slipping, and when it gave way, it wouldn't go unnoticed. The tension inside the Late Show studio was palpable as the episode surged ahead. The audience, energized by Stephen Colbert's sharp criticism, buzzed with anticipation. Behind his desk, Stephen commanded the room, his gestures precise and his voice cutting, mixing humor with pointed attacks. Elon Musk sat across from him, composed but tense, his calm demeanor stretched thin. What began as a policy debate on geoengineering had taken a personal turn, and Stephen seemed intent on winning, unaware of the deeper divisions he was provoking. Stephen escalated, his sarcasm thick as he questioned Elon's intentions, with a blend of mockery and force. He framed Musk as a man so consumed by his own intelligence that he'd gamble the planet to validate it. Every comment was paired with dramatic gestures and glances to the crowd. The audience responded enthusiastically, cheering as Stephen accused Elon of hiding behind data and technology while ignoring the possible harm his drones could cause. It was a carefully orchestrated critique, and Stephen was firmly in control of the narrative. Elon's responses became more pointed. His words, though fewer, cut through the noise with precision. He spoke of decades of inaction, of failures by leaders and experts to address the climate crisis, while he, at least, was trying something. His arguments were backed by logic and carried a clear sense of urgency. But Stephen wasn't ready to give ground. He seized on every pause, repackaging Elon's words into quick jabs for the crowd to react to. He ridiculed Elon's seriousness, implying it was performative, just outrage from someone unused to being challenged. The laughter grew, and Elon's grip on the chair tightened. Things escalated when Stephen took it further. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and asked whether Elon's real goal was to abandon Earth once it was beyond repair, escaping to Mars while everyone else suffered. The suggestion was exaggerated, but the audience responded with cheers, overpowering Elon's attempt to reply. Stephen stood tall, arms raised, clearly reveling in the moment. He didn't notice Elon's expression shift, or the way his breath leveled, as though he had reached a decision. The host misread the silence, taking it for defeat. The conversation approached a critical point. Stephen, still feeding off the crowd's energy, pushed ahead with a final statement, accusing Elon of never truly caring about people, only his own legacy. The words hung in the air, daring a response. Elon tilted his head slightly, locking eyes with Stephen in a calm, deliberate stare. The audience, caught up in the host's rhythm, missed the shift in tone, but those behind the scenes noticed. The crew exchanged looks as the atmosphere changed subtly. Still riding the momentum, Stephen smiled wider, unaware he might have just set the stage for a powerful response. The studio buzzed with tension, thick enough to feel. Under the bright lights of the Late Show, Stephen Colbert stood confidently, his latest jab at Elon Musk's perceived indifference still echoing through the applause. The crowd backed him, their cheers drowning out any opposing voice. Across the stage, Elon remained quiet, no longer out of restraint, but as a deliberate pause, his silence charged with intent. Stephen, caught in the momentum of the moment, didn't notice the change, didn't realize he'd crossed a line until Elon finally spoke. Elon stood, measured and calm, his presence alone diminishing Stephen's bravado. His voice was firm but composed, cutting through the noise without needing to raise volume. He methodically countered the attack, pointing out the irony in being lectured by someone whose career thrived on sarcasm. The audience grew uneasy as Elon outlined the contradiction. A critic who mocked initiatives while offering none, who fueled division while claiming moral authority. Stephen hesitated, his grin slipping, but attempted to regain control with a forced chuckle. Elon continued, this time with clarity and control, calling out the way Stephen had turned a serious discussion into entertainment, treating geoengineering like a punchline rather than an urgent issue. He described a world where hesitation meant disaster, arguing that people who acted even imperfectly mattered more than those who simply commented. The crowd quieted, some applauding cautiously, others stunned as Elon's words landed with weight, not wit. Stephen tried to respond, but his comebacks lacked their earlier bite. Elon moved forward, now challenging the host's own record, years of critique without direct involvement. He asked the audience to consider who had really let them down, the one taking risks to address a global crisis or the one profiting from outrage without consequence. The atmosphere shifted. Elon's controlled rebuttal had exposed a vulnerability in Stephen's approach, and it showed. The crew stood still, cameras catching every expression as the moment unfolded. Stephen reacted, his voice raised and shaky, ordering Elon to leave the set. It was a defensive move, a bid to reassert control, but it misfired. Elon didn't react. He simply stood there, unshaken, letting the tension speak louder than words. The crowd murmured. Some now booed the host, the mood shifting as Stephen's authority weakened. He repeated the order, louder this time, but the damage was done. The energy had turned. Elon didn't need to argue further. The audience had already decided. The studio lights seemed dimmer, though they hadn't changed. As The Late Show reached its most chaotic point, Stephen Colbert stood behind his desk, face flushed, his call for Elon Musk to leave still echoing awkwardly. The audience, once solidly behind him, now wavered, reacting with a mix of boos, gasps, and hesitant applause. Their certainty was gone. Elon remained where he was, unmoved, his presence a quiet response to the chaos around him. He didn't look angry, just unimpressed. What had started as an interview had turned into a reversal, and the guest now owned the moment. Stephen tried to recover, voice cracking slightly as he signaled the crew, cut to commercial, remove Elon, anything to regain control. But the broadcast continued, capturing every pause, every flicker of discomfort. Elon didn't react. His silence stood in contrast to the host's visible strain. Then he spoke again, calmly, conversationally, asking the audience why people like Stephen were so focused on tearing others down. It wasn't a question seeking an answer, more a closing remark, quiet but pointed. The atmosphere shifted further. More of the audience turned against the host, the reaction now more vocal. Elon's strength wasn't in volume or showmanship. It was in the clarity of his words. He stepped forward, not to exit, but to address the audience directly. He outlined the challenges the world faced: rising seas, devastated agriculture, a future slipping away, while critics fixated on surface-level attacks. His tone wasn't desperate, it was direct. The audience listened. Some nodded. A few stood in a quiet show of support. Stephen's desk, once a place of control, now looked like a barrier. He slumped into his seat, thumbing through notes, hoping for something to ground him. Elon, seeing there was nothing left to say, gave a final nod, not to the host but to the viewers. It was a subtle gesture that made clear his purpose. He hadn't come to spar with Stephen, but to reach those watching. Then he left the stage on his own terms, quietly, confidently, not because he was asked, but because he was finished. The audience reacted, some applauding, others unsure, but no one was unaffected. The moment had left its mark. Stephen sat alone as the lights finally dimmed, the crew scrambling behind the scenes, applause giving way to an uneasy stillness. He looked at his desk, no trace of the usual grin, only a stunned expression that showed he understood what had just happened. Elon had shifted the narrative not with anger, but with a message that landed harder than any punchline. The episode closed quietly, Stephen muttering a brief sign-off, but the control had already slipped from his hands. Elon had walked away steady, while Stephen was left in a silence that said more than any final word.